Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you may be. My name is Steve Fraser, and I'm in Silicon Valley, and we have a panel today around the world, from Taiwan to Auckland, New Zealand, to North America. So on behalf of my fellow panelists, welcome to our panel on software profession dimensions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'll show the cast slide here, but I'm not going to run through all the names. I'm going to let each panelist will do a self-introduction and to set the context for DEI principles, as described by my colleague Heidi Musser, chair of the Agile Alliance Board. Accessibility is being able to get into the building. Diversity is getting invited to the table. Inclusion is about having a voice at the table. Equity is having fair and just practices and policies to ensure that all can thrive at the table. Belonging is having your voice heard at the table. So during preparations for the panel, a number of questions were raised, and they're posted on the SPLASH program page. And we are going to use Mentimeter. The code is posted. If you're just listening to this, it's 415-42718, dialing for questions, which will be used for our Q&A. Now, discussions will be documented by our raconteur, Dennis Mansell, who's currently in New Jersey, and we plan to publish a report in ACM SIGSOF notes. Now, without further ado, by the way, I'm wearing a New Zealand sweater. I just thought it was appropriate, multicolors for multi-purpose discussions. So I'd like to now throw the floor over to Jeff Kaufman, and then we will go to Xingying Pao in Taiwan, where it's a little after 5:30 in the morning. Terribly sorry about the hours. And then we'll come back to the room into Auckland, where Alex and Sally Slowly will facilitate the in-room conversation. And again, Mentimeter will be used to keep everybody engaged around the world. So over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Steve. Delighted to be here. My name is Jeff Kaufman. I am an associate professor in the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in North America. I'm a social psychologist by training, but most of the research I do, I label as applied psychology. I apply psychological principles and theories to designing what I call persuasive or transformative interactions or experiences. A lot of the work that I do intersects with diversity, equity, and inclusion in different ways. Primarily, a lot of the work that I've done is in the space of designing games or storytelling platforms that deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion. For example, games that aim to reduce unconscious biases or raise awareness of how bias emerges in everyday interactions. More recently, I've been looking at bias from the opposite perspective, finding ways of empowering members of marginalized or stereotype targeted groups to express their experiences and get support for them. That includes some of the same principles I use in my other work, for example, using games and storytelling as a mechanism for sharing one's experiences in a psychologically safe fashion. Here at CMU, I also teach courses in persuasive design. I just wrapped up a class this semester in which students were learning psychological theory and applying it to designing interactions, a number of which actually focused on mitigating or reducing bias in a variety of contexts. I'm also a member of a lab called the Data-Driven Diversity Research Lab here at CMU, where we focus on doing research on interventions to improve experiences of students from marginalized groups, specifically interventions to improve a sense of belonging and inclusion in classroom contexts. So DEI is central to the work that I do, and I'm delighted to be here. Happy to share any more about the research I do if it becomes relevant during today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Over to you, Xingying.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shenling Bao, and thank you, Steve, for inviting me to this very interesting, very exciting panel in New Zealand. And like Steve just mentioned, here I'm in Taiwan. I'm currently an assistant professor in the interdisciplinary, intercollegiate international PhD program in National Tsinghua University. And also I am a also a professor at the EECS, Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, as well as in the College of Art in the same university in Taiwan. And before I joined the faculty here, I was in the United States working in the industry, primarily on driving the strategy for a big corporation and working in diverse areas to lead the collaborations and university industry collaborations. A lot of domains using technology, but to provide new products in healthcare. So my academic training is actually in biomedical science and computer science. But then later on, I'm actually an artist at core. So I integrated these different areas, primarily biomedical science, computer science, and design and art. So I finished my PhD at MIT Media Lab, but prior to that, I was actually doing my PhD in biomedical engineering at UC Berkeley and at UCSF Medical School. So I'd like to actually look at our topic today, look at the diversity, equity, and inclusions from the perspective of interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary inclusions. And my research focus is primarily on the intersection of artificial intelligence and human experience. How do we design new human experience with this multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary interactions, and also bringing new, looking at our future human experiences with the ongoing changes of new technology development. And yeah, so that's a brief introduction. So we'll talk more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Xingyang. And I think there may be an open mic. We'll go back to the room now. Alex and Sally, why don't you start off introductions in room? And I don't know how you want to do that, but I suspect Kelly, being not very diverse and inclusive with the alphabet, will start with you. But then again, I've started the other end of the alphabet, which might surprise some. So I'll leave it to you, Alex and Sally. Over to you.
So, hi, my name is Alex Slowly. I'm an agile coach in Sydney, Australia. And my partner in crime today.
I'm Sally Slowly. I'm also an agile coach in Sydney, Australia, down for the week. But let's get into introducing our panels. So as we said, each of you take 3 minutes. I think you've got your...
Yep.
Good to go.
And you want me to start?
Yeah, please go.
Okay. Kia ora koutou. I'm Kelly Blinker. I'm at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. My background is in software engineering. So I was a software engineer in industry for 8 years before going and getting my PhD in industry in the US. I then got my PhD in the US and moved to New Zealand afterwards. My research has been on human aspects in software engineering. So I primarily have looked at kind of the way we develop software and how that could possibly be done better to make teams more productive, more efficient, and happier, if I'm going to put it in a very simple terms. And part of that has kind of led me to thinking about diversity in software teams and the way we create software. So you'll see a list of questions. You'll probably be able to pick up on which one was mine. But the way we create software is that impacting our diversity and inclusion in the industry. So we have all of these practices and tools that have been created primarily by a homogenous group. So my research has been looking at, how can we actually look at these practices and tools and change them possibly to be able to bring in more diverse perspectives into the software industry, because people feel like the practices and tools are meant for them rather than just for a smaller set of people. So that's my research. And I'm at the panel today to kind of hopefully talk a little bit about that research. And then also I have a fellowship that I was just awarded, a 5-year fellowship. And that is going to be starting a longitudinal study. And that one's specifically focusing on gender diversity. And it's going to be looking at the experiences as people enter the software industry. So a cohort of graduating university students as they enter this industry. What their experiences are, and looking at that in a gender kind of lens, and also some intersectionality as well, to see if we can learn from these different experiences on how we could improve inclusion in the industry. That's about me.
Awesome. Hey folks, I'm Tanya Johnson. 9 years ago, I founded a community for women and other marginalized genders in tech. We run frequent in-person meetups, and we also have a thriving Slack community supporting that group. By day, I'm VP of Product at Aura, where I lead a team of software engineers and designers and QAs and other wonderful folks to build software to better report, solve, and prevent crime. I studied law, and then I ended up working as a software developer before moving into product management. So I've had a little bit of a weird, wiggly journey into this. And I've spent the last 2 decades working at very fast-scaling software companies, building products in education and for public and private sector loss prevention. In my spare time, I teach product people how to build things that they won't regret later, hopefully. And I'm really interested in ethical product development and how we build products that better serve the communities that we're in. One question that I added today to the panel is, how do we build diverse teams and create kind of inclusive work environments to make sure that the products that we're building don't do harm? And so I'm really interested in that aspect of it. I'm really excited to be here amongst people with such amazing research backgrounds. I don't have an academic background at all. What I'll be bringing to today's panel is my experience in 24, 25 years of working, building products.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, Chiara Katokatwa, my name is Mahsa Mikoli. I'm a Director of Women in Technology and Senior Lecturer in the School of Engineering, Computer and Mathematical Sciences at AUT here in Auckland, New Zealand. Also, I'm the Director and Founder of a charitable trust called She Sharp. So we started She Sharp 2014. So I'm a founder of that group. As a student, PhD student at the time, really wanted to create that platform for women in tech to have a place to be able to share, learn, and network. So I was always part of the minority. And things didn't change when I started, lecturing at university, being, seeing in my classes only 5 female students. I'm a huge advocate for gender diversity, specifically in tech. So I started this group with the hope that we can close gender gap by actually showing the interesting human-centered part of the technology to our next generation of Wahine females here in New Zealand. And at the moment, we have over 1,000 members just in Auckland. We have a few branches in different parts of the country, in Wellington, Christchurch, and also we're working closely with some of friends in Australia. So it is a triangle of bringing high school students, university students, and professionals from industry. So usually our event has an element of creating a role model by hearing from some of the inspiring females in that area. And the second part of it is really practical by getting the opportunity to try technology and decide for themselves. My day job as a senior lecturer at university, my area of research is artificial intelligence, machine learning, but specifically natural language processing. So I'm fascinated about how we can get these computers to finally be able to understand all of those human nuances and be able to, communicate, and we can close that language barrier worldwide. So I'm all about ethical, respectful, and transparent artificial intelligence. One of my other role here, I'm sitting on a board of AI Forum New Zealand. So we are working actively since 2019 to come up with the national AI strategy for New Zealand. So this is something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm so excited to be, hearing from everyone today in the room and looking forward to our panel.
That's great, thanks. So I'm Stephanie Camarina. I come from Melbourne, Australia. The little accent that you hear at the back is from France, where I was born. I'm here today. I have a background, I've been working in IT for over 20 years, more at that interface between business and tech, doing that translation work. And I've done that for a long time. But about 14 years ago, I moved from designing solutions to designing for the specific purpose of sustainability. And over the past 4 years, I've finished a PhD, which is in how do we engage with artificial intelligence to design for transition to sustainable system. And I focus more specifically in food systems. That led me to start a special purpose company, Source Transitions, where we work with businesses and government to really deepen and accelerate their sustainability impact. And the way we do that is that junction between AI thinking, agility, and design. The benefits of being able to consult with big companies is that it funds another project which is for us really important. It's working with what I call the unusual suspects, the places where you wouldn't think about AI, you wouldn't think of sending designers or sustainability experts because they're small, they're often decentralized, they have power when they come together as a group. But I've been working with farmers, small farmers, schools, food rescue organization for the past few years. It's been an incredible experience working with the diversity of people and then finding out, when Stephen was talking about the famous table, finding out how, we identify who is missing around the table and then getting them involved and the richness and the depth that it brought to the type of solutions that we were able to create was quite incredible. We've been able to work on ethical questions and discrimination and bias and unfair treatment as problems were arising. And that's what's brought me to this panel today to talk a little bit about that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Great introductions. Let's see what we have next. Here are some questions that we've sourced from the people on the panel, as well as other interested people. Stephen, you're displaying the questions on the platform there. That's good.
Yeah, I see the questions, and actually, to solicit more questions and input to the panel, it might be useful to put up that Mentimeter. Dialing for questions seems to be an odd way of putting it, but given that we've got a hybrid audience, both in room and virtual, and I'm hoping that Mary Shaw has turned up in our audience, but maybe not. She is here. Okay, I see acknowledgement, and. These questions actually reflect that there was a lot of diversity in the questions. We have everything from AI to how we build teams. My personal favorite is inclusion in meetings. Post-pandemic, are we going to continue to include people from around the world, not just the people who actually come to a meeting or to a conference? So I'll put my name next to that one. I will say that, but perhaps at this point, the question might be is to go to Jeff and Xingying to see if you each submitted a question and or have views on some of the questions that are there. Maybe you might make some comments about the importance and remember, as per I think it was the keynote yesterday, Mary's keynote. It's the questions are really important. Are we solving the right problem? Before we start digging into, are we solving the problem right? It's questions are really important because if we don't address the right questions, we may be lost in the wilderness. So, and Alex has just put up that Mentimeter. So if you're online, and I don't know how many of you are, in fact, online, I'm just taking a quick peek here to see who's in this session. But I'll throw it back to Alex. Maybe you want to take questions in the room as well. But first, maybe it's a toss-up. Jeff, Xingying, do you want to say a few words, and then we'll go back to Alex and Sally?
Sure, happy to step in. So the question I submitted is the one regarding the question of harm of non-inclusive or inaccessible technologies, and what steps are we taking to evaluate and mitigate the harm that the technologies that we're creating and disseminating might be having on members of groups who are not well served or well represented in those technologies. And for a bit of context for my question, I've recently started a new project looking at trying to assess the psychological harm, specifically with speech recognition errors in language technologies. And so some of the work that we're doing so far has found, in fact, that if we compare members of privileged groups to members of marginalized groups, and how they respond to the same type of, for example, error committed by technology in terms of speech recognition, we're seeing quite different patterns of responses. So in an initial study, we compared the responses of Black and white American participants to a voice assistant that was programmed to exhibit a higher versus lower rate of speech recognition errors. And we found that Black participants were affected in ways that were much in line with prior research on racial microaggressions. Essentially, there's prior work finding that if you're not well understood in an interpersonal communication context, that can have real negative impact on things like self-esteem and a sense of belonging, and a sense of inclusion. And we're finding similar patterns with interactions with technology in our early work here. And so that's the full context. A lot of work has been done to date. So documenting disparities in technologies, including language technologies, trying to understand the causes of inaccuracies or those disparities. Our work now is trying to shift that narrative to focus more on the perspective of end users who are impacted, not just in terms of utility of the technology, but actually how it might actually affect their own sense of identity, their own sense of self-worth and value in those contexts, with an eye toward thinking of ways of improving those interactions in ways that might undo that harm. So I'm very much interested in this space of understanding maybe the unforeseen, maybe unrecognized, maybe unmeasured harm that inequities or biases in technology might be having, in ways that we, as either researchers or designers, might be able to start to mitigate that while we're waiting for the technology to serve these populations better, to be more accurate.
Just a quick interjection here. Are you looking at metrics on how to measure that harm? I'm just curious from perspective.
Yeah. So what we've used so far, and we're absolutely interested in exploring a variety of ways of approaching this question, but the methods we've been using are drawn from the psychology literature on microaggressions and stereotype threat. And so we borrowed a set of psychometric evaluations, looking at things like self-esteem, cognitive load, negative emotional responses like anxiety, that have been shown and been well documented in interpersonal microaggressions. And we're finding those metrics have produced similar responses in our studies with technology. And so that's the approach we've taken. But I'm curious if others have insights about ways of assessing harm, the sort of subjective experience of harm from different points of view. But that's the approach we've been taking, drawn, maybe not surprisingly, given my background in psychology, from the research literature, from social psychology specifically.
Thanks. I noticed that Qingying had dropped off, so maybe we could go to somebody in room while she gets reconnected. I saw Tanya nodding her head. Do you have specific viewpoints from industry? Because that's a little more subjective in some ways. Industry can do many things, and at the end of the day, it's usually the bottom line that makes the most difference, not whether or not, I hate to say it, that there is measured harm or lack thereof.
I was nodding along because I'm actually fascinated in the research that Jeff's doing. I think it's amazing that they're looking at emotional impacts on people. When we're building software, a lot of the time what we're looking at is risk minimization and how we can do harm. And particularly when I'm working in the area of crime, we're looking at how we can make sure that we don't introduce bias that, for example, impacts people of color and the rate at which they're ending up in the judicial system. So we're often looking at very specific, very kind of solid metrics around that. And I love that there's research being done into other types of harm that are being caused by this. A lot of our work is really down to what is it that we're building, who's going to use it, who's going to be impacted by it, who's supporting the people that are impacted by it, and what are the impacts going to be on them, what could be harmful, and how can we minimize those risks. And then often what we do is we actually rate it based on the level of harm, the risk minimization that we've been able to put in place, and whether or not we can proceed based on those factors. So very, very, I suppose, practical applications of these things without necessarily going into all of the research about the impacts of it out the other end.
Great. Xingyang, did you want to? I apologize. You missed some of the conversation. I guess your link wasn't as strong as you would have liked it to be. Do you have any feedback, or perhaps we'll go back to the room and? Oh, Sally, I see you standing there.
Yeah, I'm back. Okay, so yeah, what we were thinking is you got to look at some of the questions that came in from both our panelists and some of the other people involved with setting up this panel. But what we'd like to do now, if you can look at the screen, you'll see instructions for how to go to menti.com. What we'd love is for those of you in the room to be able to log into your computer or your phone and be able to pose your own questions. Oh, actually, lies. We're going to start with a couple of other things. I forgot about these slides. If you could let us know right now, where is home right now for you? Where do you consider your home? We just want to get a feel for where people are from, where their happy place is right now. I'll give you just a couple of minutes to do that.
I think the voting closed on that one already.
Okay. And it looks like everybody's gone through a couple of these already, so fantastic. What kind of work do you do? We were looking at the difference between researchers, practitioners, students, managers, and other. Looks like research and other has won. I'd love to delve in a little deeper into that. Okay, and then we're back to the questions. So we've got a couple of them up there, but we'd like to invite you to add any other questions that you have. And then what we're going to do is Alex and I will choose one and we will pose it to our panelists and we'll set up a nice time box to make sure we don't talk about the same one forever and get into some of the details and see how the panelists are thinking about these questions. So we'll give you just a minute to go ahead and add a few more.
While we're waiting for some of those suggested questions to come in, I wanted to give Dennis Mansell a quick moment to say a few words, if he wishes, to introduce himself. He was the one person we didn't actually have give an introduction.
Dennis Mansell. I'm based in New Jersey, United States. I worked for many years in telecom. I'm still interested in doing some kinds of legacy software, agile design issues, but also how people learn things and how people get along. I'm particularly interested in the diversity question because, you know, of all of my years in Bell Labs, boy, did we have a diverse team. And I'm talking about every possible category, and we saw a lot of productivity about it. And I'm afraid, you know, of industry actually losing the edge that it had once upon a time. So back to you.
Thanks. Now back to the room. Sally.
All right. So the first question we're going to start off with today is, what are the implications of not including underrepresented groups in the development of AI technology? And why is diversity so crucial to the development of AI? And what we're going to do is we're going to set up that time box. And if you don't mind, we'll start with you, Stephanie.
Okay. Well, I can only talk from experience, and from experience, I lost the question, but from experience, the problem you get once you start implementing and engaging with AI with groups of people, and you're missing some representation in there, is that first of all, you don't understand the problem properly, and you're just trying to arrive with a technological solution, some type of fix to something, without really understanding the context. Sorry, I really missed what the question was. You could put it back. Thank you.
The yellow box.
The yellow one. Cool. Sorry. Apologies for that. It's just because I was reading all of the questions at the same time. So the work that I've done has been completely different once we started inviting to the table different type of people that were having actually opposing views. So to give you an example, we would work with farmers, and they wanted to tell the story of quality of their soil and produce, and how it was good for health. And then we started discovering that you had soil scientists being invited and having a completely different idea about what should be measured and how, to other people that have been doing regenerative agriculture for a very long time. What happened is that you ended up having a different type of data brought up into the project to really try to resolve their problem. I'm not making sense, am I?
No, you do it.
Just like I'm trying to tell the story of how we brought those people to the table, and then they completely transformed the way we looked at different problems. So to give you an idea, we had tech people coming in and saying, well, we could measure the nutrient density inside the produce, and we could do that using image recognition and object detection, and we could look at the skin color and texture and have a better idea of how your produce is of quality. But then we had farmers around the table who would say, well, if you do that, then what are we going to do when people turn up to the farmers markets and then decide that they want only the top quality produce? As small farmers, we actually have seconds and less quality produce. What is that going to do to our industry? So those diversity of voices have completely transformed the way we even looked at the problem itself, and resolved some of those ethical questions.
What other thoughts do we have on the panel about this question?
What are the other thoughts?
What are your other thoughts?
Sure. So,
well, let's go to Xingyang. Let's go to Xingyang, because I was just going to say that she mentioned in her opening remarks that she was focused on the intersection of AI and technology, and from a very diverse perspective. Sorry.
I got disconnected earlier. I don't know if that happened to any of you, but when it happened, and then I think they matched with the topic of today very well. It's a kind of, inclusion. It's not from, from any of us. It's from the machines, from the, the infrastructure, from the, the tools that we use. Sometimes it's kind of things that happen, which will result in, for example, when we look at a certain minority, they may get less of the resources, less of the poor quality of the connections, for example, in certain areas. And then on the other hand, I'm also, when I'm working on the research crossing different disciplines, interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary work, this also bring to the topic when we look at the development of technologies today, especially when we look at artificial intelligence, as Steve mentioned. It's growing so fast, and then there's a lot of changes when we see the world today comparing to the world just a few years ago, the world that was a decade ago, and then now if we project this kind of speed and this kind of technologies growing in the future of the world, how do we look at the technology that may impact on every one of us, particularly on the diversity and the equity and the inclusion of the use of technologies, of particularly in artificial intelligence, for example? How do we see the impact of artificial intelligence even on this topic that we are talking about? Would it be the same thing that we are considering today? Most people, when looking at the topic, will be, directly thinking of, gender or minority or these kind of things. But would that be the same thing that's of our concern when artificial intelligence continues to grow and have a much more influences on our everyday lives? And that's just a question that I
Uh-oh, we have an inclusion issue here. And this goes to the point of designing meetings to be more, and technology to be more inclusive. Sorry, I apologize. There was someone in room who also started a comment. But one of the things that we've seen here at Stanford was AI training data. If it's not inclusive, and you only train a system, say an autonomous vehicle, with white males, you might tend to run over people of color or people wearing hats or animals, cats, etc. So maybe look at DEI issues more broadly as they apply to AI systems. And was it Tanya? Oh, Tanya's disappeared. Oh no, Tanya's still there. Or was it Marsha, excuse me, who started? I apologize again.
No worries, Stephen. I was going to say that, so artificial intelligence, for those of you that they're not working in that field, so it's the type of artificial intelligence we have today is artificial narrow intelligence. So these systems are really designed to do one specific task, and over time they're getting better. And the core for it is really machine learning, which works based on some known existing data that is provided to the machine to create that model. These known data, it is coming from the human being that trained this system in the very first place. So what I believe, and which is really known, it is algorithmic bias, which is in another way unconscious bias at the human level coded to the system. So this is why it's really important in the very first step that we have a diverse team in place to be able to come up with the diverse data, and that the model is inclusive, and then as a result of that we get output. We've heard about examples that the system, they gone completely wrong because they didn't, they excluded one type of a skin tone, they one type of group, and as a result of that we're going to have a system that they are biased, they're unfair, and sometimes harmful for a specific group of people. There's an example I heard from a colleague at Google a couple of years ago, which is stuck with me, and I usually share it when it's a talk around diversity and inclusion. And he was saying that a few years back, when very first time they put YouTube app, so they just they release YouTube app to people to download it and just upload their videos. They noticed after a couple of days, the majorities of videos they uploaded, they're upside down. So any idea what was wrong? So we're talking about Google and YouTube app, and that was the YouTube app on a different, OS. So what happens if you're right-handed, you hold your phone like that. If you're a left-handed, you hold your phone like that. So as you can see, so the camera is in a different, place. So we were talking about big company at the time. They didn't have any left-handed in a development group, let alone testing. And it's not, diversity is not about gender. So it's everything, ethnicity, skills. So this is why it's so important. The diverse team, at least in the very first place, we can hope that our product, it is really covering a bigger perspective, bigger population. and hopefully it is well suited for the users that they're going to use that. Thank you.
All right, time is up on that one.
Yeah, let's go to the next question.
Do you have one in mind for us?
Yeah, I did actually.
All right.
Let me stop the scrolling. That one right there, the regret one. Can you read that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question we're going to start off with is how do we build diverse teams and create inclusive work environments to make sure we're building software we won't regret later? Someone want
Kelly
to?
at the other end?
Sure, why not?
I think this goes back to what we were just talking about with AI. It's not just AI that can have these types of issues. The YouTube example that Masa just gave. When we don't have diverse perspectives on software teams, we can accidentally create systems that exclude, frustrate, or endanger other people. You see this in examples of engineering where, the car safety devices were designed primarily for men's bodies and not women. And women are still being killed and seriously injured in car accidents, significantly more likely even today because of that engineering decision. And this also happens in software systems. There's been research that shows there's different kind of cognitive factors that influence how you interact with software systems. And that there's some gender differences in this, but it's not just about gender, it's about just the way we think in terms of interacting with software. So some people, for example, are more likely to tinker with software when they're learning new software. So they're happy to click on buttons and do things without knowing if they're headed in the right direction or not. Whereas other people want clear instructions. They want to make sure that they're going on the right track. They're afraid to click buttons that if they don't know that they're going on the right track. And so if we have like healthcare systems, for example, that are being designed primarily for people that tinker, because that's the more common cognitive trait of men who are designing the systems, then we might be excluding other people that think differently from using these systems. So I think it's really about making sure that we have these diverse perspectives on our teams so that we can ensure that the users are being adequately represented.
All right. We're interested in what Jeff has to say over in the USA.
Yeah, absolutely. Building on that point, which I totally agree with, I think having mechanisms in place that allow for a diversity of perspectives to be voiced is easier said than done, right? So it's one thing, as Stephen mentioned in his intro, to have mechanisms that allow diversity to exist in the first place, to have diverse perspectives, identities, et cetera, represented in a group. And a whole other set of challenges in how do you actually make the processes of communication, decision-making, et cetera, equitable within that space. How can you provide a psychologically safe forum where diverse perspectives can be shared equally and equally valued and respected? So I think thinking about what steps we can take to ensure that level of mutual respect is really important, because essentially one potential pitfall of diversity is it can often predict higher rates of conflict. So what comes with diversity perspectives could be a higher proportion of disagreement, or having to navigate differences in experience, differences in points of view. And so thinking of ways of making the climate of a team psychologically safe and inclusive, having mechanisms, for example, for establishing norms of communication early on has been shown to be really effective. Taking that steps of ensuring an onboarding process where new members feel valued and respected from the beginning. So lots of steps we can take that research is backing, but I think our practices are being slow to catch up with that. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of actually normalizing and maybe even standardizing these best practices for creating inclusive, welcoming, truly respectful climates where diversity exists.
It looks like we have some other thoughts from the panel here.
I was just thinking, Jeff, I can agree more with what you mentioned. So having a diverse team is really important, but how can we actually create that environment by, encouraging, for example, I'm talking about the gender diversity, because that was my biggest dilemma, over time, noticing what's happening in that field. So I can tell you in New Zealand, one of the things which is one of the scariest stats that I recently found out, it's only 3% of our 15-year-old high school students, girls, they consider tech as a career path. Only 3%. So it means that when they are 15, they already know that that path is not for them. As a result of that, today, even every week, I'm getting a phone call from start of different companies. They're looking for the female graduate to join their company. They know the benefit of, diverse workforce, to increase, innovations, to increase efficiency, productivity, but we don't have them in the very first place. Why don't we just, encourage more girls from early on to consider that? And then we are working with this limited group of a student and university. We're trying to provide a safe place for them to thrive, but make sure that although they're part of minority, but they still have a place, to thrive and grow. Then they go to the industry. And many of them, this is a time that they decided, this is not my field. So a lot of work it goes to, nurture the right people to come to the field. But it is the work of all different ecosystems from early on in school to university, industry. Together, we make sure that we have to work together to be able to have this group of, talented female engineers to join the workforces. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. And this is happening every day. So at the university, right, that the number of female students in the School of Engineering is less than 20%. The number of women working in AI field global right now, it is 26%. Machine learning is only 12%. So we have such a long way to catch up.
So I would encourage the panel to think of it as a conversation up here. So you don't have to rely on me as the moderator to ask questions. However, I will ask if there's anything new, if there's anything different that you want to add to this conversation.
Yeah, I might bring the dimension of agility. How you build agile teams and build those social contracts inside the way teams work. Identify iterations of knowledge co-creation in a team, which means that together we're deciding, with which intent we want to run that team and the work that we're doing together, and also what type of reflection we introduce in how the team works, how we learn. I think that's been an interesting process, especially with the field of AI, where you might have something that you kind of unleash onto the world, and then it becomes its own thing. It continues to evolve with time, and we need processes in place that will pick up on those changes and review them and retrospect on them. So I think there's something quite interesting, at that junction between agility and development.
I know we're almost out of time. And I think the ideals of having an inclusive team and having emotional safety and that kind of thing are really strong, as well as the pipeline problem that Marcia talks about, through university. But what we're actually finding is so many women come into this industry through other alternative means. They're not necessarily coming through the university pipeline. They're coming through boot camps. They're self-taught. They're transferring from other areas of the business. And I think when we look at software engineering teams, particularly in New Zealand, if you walk into them, the proportion of men to women is massively disparate. And, I often hear from teams saying, well, how do I hire more women? And first of all, you don't start hiring until you've got a diverse pipeline. We can Rooney rule this. We can put in place a rule that we do not hire until that pipeline is diverse. We can look at things like our job adverts and make sure that the wording that we're using isn't discouraging women and other marginalized folks from applying. There have been a lot of studies done into this, and there's a lot that a company can actually do to get to that diverse team in the first place that they can then leverage by building inclusive teams. But I think a lot of the time the problem is at how we actually hire these people in the first place.
I'd like to interject on Tanya's comment there. Is Mary Shaw still in the audience? Because yesterday she gave a discussion on vernacular programmers, which are quite a large population in comparison to professional programmers. So I don't know if she's live in the audience, and perhaps the microphone could be stuck in front of her, and she could offer some comments.
I'm here, Steve, and the microphone has been stuck in front of me.
And the lady from Pittsburgh, as Dick Gabriel would say. So over to you.
One of the things I talked about yesterday was the vast numbers of people who are not professionally trained software developers who are developing software for their own means and their own ends. And I think in the context of this discussion, that we should look at the routes that people take into software development, understanding that most of what we see is routes into professional software development, and ask whether those routes could be more amenable to a more diverse population. So I don't know who goes to boot camps, but I suspect it's mostly white men.
It's actually not.
Not
It's
really.
mostly women.
Actually, good.
Transferring. So we've hired a few who were pharmacists and office managers and a geotech, all who retrained through boot camps.
Okay, so boot camps are offering an avenue for a more diverse population, and I'm really pleased to hear that. The obvious routes that we see, like the boot camps, like undergraduate programs, are attracting the people who want to make software developer the first line on their business cards. And I think it's worth spending some time thinking about how other industries that involve software development as a means to some other end, how they attract software developers. And there's no single fit, because this ranges all the way from people in offices using spreadsheets. And what I talked about yesterday was the very poor language support that the programming language world provides for the tools here, through scientific programming, where they do scripting of sophisticated libraries. I think it's worth looking at how people are attracted into those professions, and within those professions, whether there's a bias in who selects themselves to be doing software development. But the data that I see suggests that what I call the vernacular developers, the people who are developing software as a means to some other end, they outnumber professional programmers by an order of magnitude or so. And so there's a huge set of opportunities out there that I think that we are not paying sufficient attention to.
I know I went to a research software engineering workshop that was focused on diversity and inclusion earlier this year, and they were struggling. So these are people that are creating software for research in biology or in any other field outside of software. And their stats, and primarily they were talking about gender diversity, so I don't have other stats outside of that, but it was 9% women in the research software engineer cohort. So it was actually worse than the professional software engineers. I imagine it's different for the people that are creating spreadsheets and things. But then I don't have an answer to this question, but it's a question that I thought I'd pose to the panel is, if the majority of people are these vernacular programmers and they're maybe being less valued than professional software developers, but the gender diversity and the ethnic diversity and the socioeconomic diversity is better. How do we fix that? How do we make these jobs more valuable? Because they are creating software and they're also doing other things. They're also contributing to industry in other ways. So how do we kind of switch the narrative on what a software developer is?
I think that's a really actually good question. So I think I like to look at it like, as you mentioned, so many of them, they started looking at the software engineering path as a way to actually accomplish something else. And what is that something else that was attractive to them in the very first place? And I think we can learn a lot of lesson from that in actually encouraging more, girls from early on to consider. And I think from what I can see and I can hear and work with a lot of people in that space, it is majority of them, they are looking at it as solving a problem. They enjoying solving one type of problem. And another thing, they are seeing that human-centric part of that. So women, they love to actually, solve some problem, make things better, easier. If you're trying to approach and marketing software engineering or being a programmer as a way that you can actually make the world a better place, solve a real problem, being with people, I think we have much better chance. So they came, by chance or random fell into that just because they wanted to solve a problem and they find a path or mean to it. It is through that software engineering. So right now, so many women transitioning from career to career because with the work they're doing, they can see the opportunity of use AI, for example, for automation, but they don't know how to learn about it. They jump on a short course or online course or micro credentials and solve this problem because they wanted to solve a problem. They wanted to make things better. And I think that's a message we can take it back right from a school and just see if we can, reinforce it.
So I'd just like to add that with respect to the conventional population, students coming into a university, choosing a major, pursuing the major, sort of the obvious mainstream course, that at Carnegie Mellon and other universities, we have had success in increasing the number of women in the undergraduate population by resetting the picture that we paint, so that the image that we present about the curriculum is not we are all going to write software, but software is a means to what is it you want to do. And approaches of that kind have been successful in improving the ratios in the conventional undergraduate population.
Anything else from the panel on this topic? Anything new, different?
There was a wonderful talk given by Sasha Judd a little while ago about women's pathways into tech and how there's often hostility about the pathways they take because it's things like fan fiction and creating Tumblr blogs and building things around pop culture. And so they're not often viewed as being serious software developers, but they're building things that they love and that they enjoy, and that's their path into software development. And I wonder how we might make it less hostile and more open and more about those kind of things. And I think what you're doing at Carnegie Mellon sounds amazing.
I was going to say that Dennis had made a comment about exactly this point, that once you're in a software and development environment, often the metaphors that are used may involve war games or very macho type metaphors. And I don't know, Dennis, you could have said it better than I just said it, but there has to be an increased awareness, even once you have arrived at an industry job or an academic role.
It's sports vocabulary also, although sports are more of a women's thing today, as we know. But there are things that are non-competitive, and there are things that are more constructive than sports and war. That would actually draw a different population, and not just women, but other diverse sub-communities and races and religions. So.
Thanks, Dennis. Back to you. Oh, sorry. Go.
Yeah, I was just going to build on what Tanya said. I went to a talk, and I can't remember the name of the person, so if this is going to be archived, I'll find the paper and point you to it. But she was talking about, instead of thinking about it as pathways in, thinking about it as this braided river. So the idea is that it's not just one pathway in, but it's like multiple different ways, and we've kind of touched on that a little bit. But also that you can go out and you can do something and you can come back, and it doesn't have to be just this one career trajectory that we see as a common, white male kind of career trajectory, because they can just stay doing what they're doing. But, you might have people that need to go and care for somebody, or you might have people that need to leave the industry for whatever reason or for whatever interests. But that there's this kind of fluid way to go in and out. And having that as a kind of picture of how our industry works, maybe could be more inclusive as well.
Okay, thank you. So let's get to the next set of questions. They're on the screen right here. They're directly related. So how do you get meeting attendees to share diverse points of view rather than simply going with majority opinions? We also have a team of 4, can only have so many points of view. How should they bring in other points of view if they are short of funds? I think we can club these questions together to talk about how we can engage people, not just perhaps in meetings, but working together, right? how can we get people to share diverse points of view working together? And how do we encourage points of view when you only have so many people? Let's talk about that.
And why don't we go ahead this time and start with our folks online?
I could start.
Jeff?
Is Sheng Ying here? I saw Sheng Ying's message in the chat about being hidden from the stage, so I wanted to make sure that's addressed before I jump in.
So she's around.
Yes.
She's just not able to get from backstage. Oh, the curtain has fallen from. Maybe. Maybe Alex or Sally, if you see Jian. I see her. She's coming back. Okay. Why she's coming back? Jeff, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a pretty difficult question, right, to address how to create a sense of psychological safety in any context. But I can tell you some of the work that we've done as one step in that direction. So one of my PhD students, is looking at how to design some team environments that can cultivate a sense of safety and mutual respect. And we found that some of the most effective techniques are actually some of the easiest to implement. We designed, for example, an online chat interface that embedded basically prompts for members of a new team. These are basically people who hadn't met each other yet, and the teams were diverse by design, how we recruited for them. And we basically embedded these prompts at different points in a group discussion, to essentially just stop and consider one another's emotional experience or thoughts. So basically, to stop and reflect on how other people in this situation might be feeling in that moment, and try to sort of project what they might be feeling, and then everyone is reporting how they're feeling, and you get a sense of how accurate your read is. And we found that just that simple act of just pausing to reflect on how your experience in that moment might be different from somebody else's went a long way toward creating a climate where people were more likely to share diverse viewpoints. So that was promising for us. So the sense of increasing perspective taking and empathy as a mechanism for cultivating psychological safety. We've also found there are ways of sort of mitigating defensiveness when it comes to maybe being threatened by diverse perspectives, or feeling threatened when your own sense of, say, privilege or status is being challenged, which is known to be a key sort of barrier to inclusion. We found that if we embed against exercises where people in a group are reflecting on, say, their core values, that's a known psychological mechanism for buffering the psyche against threat. It's a technique known as self-affirmation. So essentially, reminders of values not only have this benefit of basically priming you with those values, but also has this added benefit of buffering your psyche against threat. So we're trying to find ways of orchestrating or embedding these types of reflection exercises, self-reflection, group reflection, as a way to create that sense of safety. So I think that's one step toward that answer, by sort of re-examining the processes we have in place. I think one other additional level that we're seeing is really important is having a mechanism where you can report or share experiences where you feel like you're not being included, or where you're being devalued. And that could mean some type of anonymous reporting mechanism, for example, where you can share those experiences, because we often don't realize when our own behavior is being exclusive, when we're interrupting somebody or contradicting them in ways, or responding to their input in ways that might be disrespectful, and so forth. So I think all these mechanisms often go hand in hand to create a more inclusive team environment.
I'll interject some comments from our experience at Nortel, Qualcomm, Cisco. We did exercises much similar to what you had, and anonymously, so that people didn't know who was who, but Myers-Briggs and other profiles exercises to make people understand that, hey, we've got introverts and extroverts, and they have different communication paths. We also did work with John Warfield, since passed, from George Mason University, on his interpretive structural modeling, doing stakeholder analysis workshops where the information coming from individuals sitting around the table was anonymous, so that we didn't know what was the comment coming from the vice president or from the just hired new grad, because it was the idea that counted, not the seniority of the person proposing the idea. Last but not least, even in designing a meeting or designing a session, to ensure we had requisite variety. Do we have people, not all engineers, but perhaps people from other disciplines, like from HR, from the business side, to get that sort of a diversity. Because, if you had all engineers, and then another thing was when hiring, people said, well, we're very diverse. We've hired engineers from Singapore, from China, from Europe, from Latin America, from North America. And then, we would point out, but they're all engineers, and engineers tend to think the same as engineers. They all have a very strong process and ethics focus on, are we engineering something for the right price, for the right safety level? But they're engineers. So anyhow, I'll turn it back to, I think, Xingying, do you want to add a few comments, or Dennis? And then we'll go back to the room. I guess that's a no from Dennis, and a no possibly from Xingying, who seems to be, again, discriminated by poor connectivity. Sorry. Okay, back to the
Let's
room.
go back to the panel. Who'd like to start off?
Similarly to what's been already expressed, I think there's really attending to different people way of communicating and feeling comfortable or not in certain settings is like I've used at times live meetings where we're talking to each other, but then the louder voices tend to take up the floor. So we also organize asynchronous type of input where people can take the time to reflect and then continue contributing outside of that live session. We use all sorts of activities that allow for different personalities to get a bit of that space and the time. And sometimes that's the problem is we're so rushed to doing things. And we have the impression that we need to get through this as quickly as possible, and don't realize that the time that we seem to be wasting in letting people express themselves is actually time gain, is understanding a problem better and in developing the proper solutions.
Anything new? Anything different?
I think in that 40 seconds, all I just want to add is really it's all in all, it's all about education. And it is really making it, very, very clear for people which is a safe place, and it's okay to call out discrimination. It's okay to call out unconscious bias. And it is all about, running and being, advocate for, running these unconscious bias sessions. If we don't know about it, we can actually, realize it, and we can actually solve it. So it's really important. Within a School of Engineering, the school that I am, so we probably have 4 or 5 female lecturers in that school. So we notice a lot of things, but we can't really blame anyone for it because they don't know what they don't know. So running a few of those unconscious bias, we could actually find a way to communicate. Now it's like a secret keyboard between all of us. So if there's anything happen, we all know what we are talking about, and we can just point out to it, and without insulting anyone, so we can actually solve the problem. I think it's really important that we get to that, and my time is over.
Okay, Sally has got your next question.
All right. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find it on there. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and read it out. The last question we'll have for the day is going to be, what needs to change in our software practices and tools to make the way we engineer software more inclusive?
It's a giant question.
Who'd like to start us off?
I feel like we've been talking about this already, but I think the very first part of it is ensuring that the teams working on the software are diverse, and the data sets that we're training the software on includes, a massive range. It's not just been tested on one area. So, it all comes back to that, starting with diverse teams, not just in engineering, but in testing. And the problem with all of this is that AI and machine learning, it really does pick up on our own biases, and then it propagates it at scale. And so we really want to get down to how can we eradicate those biases at the team level first before we start using AI and machine learning.
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, I think also having development teams thinking about whose voices they're hearing and whose voices are being missed. So it's not just about the team itself, which I totally agree with your points, but also the users that you're hearing from. Like, you see development teams relying on App Store reviews or things like that as kind of feedback, but there's been research that shows that those are not representative voices. There's only a subset of people that are willing to go and leave an App Store review or even know how to leave an App Store review. So making sure that you are really thinking about whose voices you're hearing and that you're not just, setting your road path for your software development based on the loudest voices of the users as well.
And all I wanted to add is, as much as it's really important to get to the application part of artificial intelligence or anything software related, it's really important we put a lot of emphasis in developing algorithms that they can minimize biases. We have to actually work on those metrics that they can value and they can measure fairness. A lot of work is happening at the moment, but it's not really enough, because this is the part that we really need to work to make sure the data we are providing for all of these systems, they are clear, they are free from any bias. And this is a lot of work already happening, but I think we can do much more in that space. A lot of research has to have a lens and focus on fairness. So IBM Watson Open Scale is one of them, and it is really talking about having a transparent AI, so that just not looking at it as a black box. So we have to have this conversation so people know there are ways to actually mitigate this risk and minimum bias.
It's I'll try to talk about an example of bias and problems and how I think software practices could change. We trained an AI to recognize bananas in a crate for a food rescue organization, and so you feed images of bananas to the algorithm, and then it recognizes which bananas are, how many bananas there are in there, and then if there are bananas versus oranges, etc. And what happened is that when you do that, to train it, most of the time you go and scrape the internet for images of bananas, and then you feed that into your algorithm. And what happens is you can do the test. You go online and you search for bananas, and what you'll find is images of perfect bananas. Most of them will be of the Cavendish type. And that's not at all what we had in the crates. What we had in the crates were half-rotten bananas, some with spots, some where there was 3 bananas together, some where there was just one. There's 500 different varieties of bananas in the world, and they did not exist in our algorithm because we didn't say, and we didn't specify, we want to have bananas with spots, ripe bananas, green bananas, bananas with others, bananas. Just to talk about what the bias as a metaphor, and you cannot expect a developer and engineers in front of a computer thinking about all of these different possibilities. The only way you can think of these different possibilities is by bringing it back in front of a team of people who discuss and say, well, what is it that we're trying to do here? So actually, in our example, we needed to recognize ripe bananas and overripe bananas and et cetera, and you decide as a team what is the context, how do you increase the diversity, so that you can't just leave the responsibility to the person in front of the computer. That's where I think the strength of the team comes from.
Nice. Did any of our online panelists want to add anything to this conversation?
Xingying, I see you're back. Oh.
May I ask?
I will. Oh, you did? Okay. Would you?
Voice to Xingying that maybe she could do it in the chat so that she can actually express herself.
But she can type for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can see her smiling, so the link is up.
Please.
But so there was one comment. Let's go back to Jeff.
Sure. I think just adding on to all the comments came before, which I completely agree with. I think I'm encouraged in my field of HCI of seeing a growing push toward methods that change the paradigm from designing for specific users to designing with them. That could take the form, for example, of an increased use of participatory design methods where members of specific populations are brought in as collaborators in the design process, not the targets of design, or efforts for algorithmic auditing where members of specific populations are helping to identify the biases that might be more implicit or embedded in the algorithms we're designing, the technologies we're creating. So I'm highly encouraged by these movements toward a growing involvement among end users in the design process in the first place. I think that's going to go a long way toward addressing some of the gaps that we're seeing in our flawed technology design.
I think that's a great point, Joe. I was thinking about that with the bananas even, like, can't we just ask lots of people to send in pictures of bananas instead of just our team having the banana ideas?
Right.
Well, there's something to be said to overcoming and educating for nostalgia. Many of us remember the way things were the golden years, not the golden bananas. But this is an issue. Like even as something as simple as talking about international conferences, people have this yearning for the past with pre-pandemic where they were in-person conferences. You could actually meet people face to face. But what we've seen since the pandemic is that virtual and hybrid enable us to be more diverse by including people from around the world who perhaps cannot travel due to government regulation, due to issues related to cost or schedule. So, I mean, there are much broader consequences to being less inclusive, less diverse, and less equitable. I'm going to try to get Xingying to say a few words now that we see you back.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been here the whole time, but sometimes connection didn't seem to be very stable. But thank you. There are actually a couple of things that from what I heard earlier from all the panelists that I wanted to echo on, particularly when Jeff mentioned his work. I think that was wonderful, and I saw a lot of design opportunities here. Actually, we could address, a lot of the issues that we have been mentioned, we have discussed, and actually there are great design opportunities. And then from what we discussed earlier, there was a book that I just came into my mind. It's called "You Cannot Say You Can't Play." You cannot say you cannot play. Okay, that was actually a book pretty much on psychology of children. So it's bizarre. It's like a human nature that when humans were born, and you could observe, we observed very, very young kids. They was when they go into a kindergarten, or when they play together, some of the kids will exclude some of other kids when they're supposed to be so young, so little. Nobody teach them to do such things, but it's somehow people, when from very, very small at very young age, started to behave in a way that, okay, we form a small group here, and then you cannot play with us, and then that's very interesting. So a few years ago, we designed actually leverage technologies to design interfaces for very young kids from this little age, for them to learn and experience how beautiful it may be to collaborate with others, to include others, instead of say, oh, you cannot play with us. Okay, so I think that's also from the very deep mindset when human beings were, from a very small, very young age, when we were looking from the other disciplines, from the, for example, educational psychology and human behavior change perspective. And also that goes back to Steve's perspective, Steve's earlier, regarding, when we look at software professionals, software development, and regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, we don't just look at software itself, but we look at, this issue from multiple disciplines, from the view of, social science, from the view of art and design, and even from the views of, different areas. When we bring all these perspectives, bring these experts from different backgrounds, different cultures, from different disciplines together, I totally agree with what Steve says. People who are engineers think very, very differently from people who are artists or designers. And throughout my recent career, when I was working at MIT Media Lab, for example, and when I'm working as a professor now, crossing, art schools and engineering school, I do observe that. But we are trying to create a more engaging, involving environment, also design, creating new designs, leveraging technologies to support that, to incorporate more people from diverse backgrounds, not just the diverse genders or social and ethics backgrounds, but diverse academic or diverse this kind of technology background, to be able to also contribute together in this domain of software development. Okay, that was my thought. Thank you.
All right, our time is up. We do have a final question for all of you today. And what's the question that you discovered? Now, you don't have to fill it out in Mentimeter now. Feel free to go to Mentimeter later. Put in the question that you discovered that's most relevant to you and your community today. But we are at the end of our session. We've got 1 minute for each panelist to summarize their learnings today. And we'll start with Masa, because I know Masa has to go somewhere. You get 1 minute. What is it you'd like to share?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to say I truly enjoyed our conversation, the everyone hearing each other point of view. As you mentioned, I have unfortunately rushed to the lecture theater, so I have a class to lecture today. But my takeaway is really hearing everyone is thinking about what one thing I can do today. Just even right now, we're going to uni to help with the diversity and inclusion in my workplace. I think it's individual responsibility. If every one of us, a single one of us, to make it a mission for us to close, I don't know, pick one of the things within the diversity. If for me it's closing a gender gap, what can I do today to close that? What can I do by just sitting at the table in our but with the coffee with my colleague to actually bring that conversation and talking about the benefit of it. I hate to see different organizations and companies, they're looking as a ticking a box exercise. That's a least thing we really want to see. So I just want people to have a meaningful but at the same time actionable approach to diversity and inclusion. And if I can be advocate for it, and if I can just spark the idea in someone's head by starting the conversation, this is my mission today.
Okay, you get to pick the next panelist to summarize before you go.
I'll go to Tanya.
All right.
Awesome. I think I'm just going to build on what Masa said. There's this old quote that said that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. And I feel like we're in that position now where we need to just start wherever we are. We don't have to necessarily make it perfect, but if we can at least make what we're doing fractionally better, we're on a good path.
You get to pick the next person.
Yeah, thank you. So my laptop doesn't die by the end. I think I want to reiterate what was just said. I think it was really heartening to hear so many people coming from so many different perspectives sharing very similar thoughts around kind of psychological safety and diversity and inclusion and belonging. But I'd like to just end saying that I totally agree with what was just been summarized. Every time you come to one of these panels or any type of event, it always feels like, well, it's too big of a problem, and so let's leave it. But I think if you just pick one tiny thing to do, and everybody does that, then it would make a big difference.
All right, who's next?
Oh, I can go. Yes, thank you for having me today, and thanks, Stephen, for inviting me. The point that I'm leaving with today is I never crystallized that idea of getting into the profession, in computer science and engineering, from another way than the academic path. And it's so true. And in many ways, it's allowing me to think about including people in a different way, instead of having this, blockage, or almost thinking, oh, the profession is this, white male, type of brick. And I'm like, well, actually, no, it's true. It's not the way it is. It's people coming at it from so many different angles at different point in times in their profession and in their life, their career or their life experience. And that will, I think, help me kind of change the way I approach things going forward. So thank you.
Now you get to pick Jeff or Xinying. Who do you want?
Let's go to Jeff.
Xinying, yeah.
Oh, no, she said Xinying.
Oh.
Yeah. Xinying, you still there?
Sure. Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
You're one
So
one.
yeah, I think I have huh?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So I think I have summarized what I thought, but the one thing that I wanted to add here is I think, Steve, you are amazing. You did a great job for bringing us together. That is that is just an example of this inclusion and diversity. Okay, for bringing us from different areas in the world, and then from different professionals of the different professions, different backgrounds, and then having this discussion that's running. So I really enjoyed it, and thank you. And we should do this more in the future.
Okay, and Jeff, last but not least.
Absolutely. I just want to echo basically all the sentiments that have been expressed. I think an important takeaway for me from these types of sessions is that it reinforces the importance of just being aware of the different ways that bias or inequity emerge around us. This could be from an introspective point of view, or we're reflecting on our own individual actions or behaviors and how they're affecting others in the context we're a part of, or looking outside of ourselves at policies or practices or structures. So I think even if we take that as an action item for ourselves, to just take a moment to reflect on our own actions or the behaviors of others around us or the institutions we're a part of, that could be a really important first step. Awareness is often the first step of counteracting inequity and injustice in all forms. So I'm often motivated and inspired by sessions like this. So I thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. And thank you, Steve, for the invitation.
Well, Dennis, did you want to add anything, or I'll go to a conclusion here? Shake your head yes or no. Oh, say something.
I have one thing, which is I think that the most valuable thing that I've gotten out of today is just this huge pile of questions. And I think the attitude of keep asking questions, because you think you've got things solved. You think, oh, I can be complacent. I don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. No, there's another point of view you haven't looked at yet. Okay.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to Mary Shaw. Thank you to Alex and Sally for facilitating in room. And I'd like to, we're dangerously close to the end here, so I'd like to thank you again to our audience as well. Don't want to leave out anybody. And I'd like to look forward to seeing you all at SPLASH 2023 in Lisbon, perhaps for a continuation of our conversation. And if not then, sometime in the intermediate days and months ahead. And last but not least, I will say that Dennis will be writing up a report, and we'll be shipping it off to all of you to add perspectives, and feel free to add more questions via Mentimeter, which will be left open for at least another week or so, just to collect more input. Thank you again to all, and signing off from Silicon Valley. And I assure you, you cannot see the Golden Gate Bridge from here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.